Hello and welcome to Podcast and Diálogo. This is a podcast focused on positive initiatives in society. My name is Mariana Machado. I'm the producer and the host of this podcast. This specific episode will be broadcasted in English, as you might have noticed. And today I have the pleasure to welcome Dada MP, a senior monk who has been teaching meditation since the 70s, really, all over the world. So Namaskar, Dada MP. You have a very, very beautiful name that I cannot pronounce. So I will ask you to say your beautiful name. And I know that you are an activist with a proven record of activism. So I will ask you also to tell me how you first got interested in activism.
So yes, my name is so Dada is an informal title. It means brother, respected or elder brother. And my formal monastic name is Mahapragyananda, as you may see there on the screen in my photo. And since that's long and difficult for many people to remember, I have a little joke of it. As Mariana already said, MP. MP. And I'm a sannyasi or renunciant and teacher of meditation and yoga and philosophy and lifestyle, representing the movement known as Ananda Marga, which translates into the path of bliss. And Ananda Marga is a combination, is a teaching and a practice that combines spiritual practices such as meditation, personal development, methods focused around the yogic tradition, with a very active involvement in society. Social change work, community service work, community development work in a great variety of ways. And when I came in contact with that was when I was a first-year university student in 1974. But for many years before that, there were many formative experiences and things in my personal life that led me to a point where when I did come in contact with this path, it felt just right for me. It was very natural. And well, I grew up in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s in the US. And of course, that was a time of great cultural change. It was the time of the civil rights movement, and then the Vietnam War, and the counterculture, and Woodstock, and as I grew up, all of these things, of course, influenced me in my values and my outlook on life. I had older sisters, and one of them particularly, I remember, conversations at the dinner table about the rights of Black people, for example, or about the protests against the Vietnam War. When I was 14 years old, my first year of high school, I went on my first protest, war moratorium. Vietnam had already finished at that time, but the U.S. was still involved in Cambodia, later Kampuchea. I was the coordinator for my hometown for one of the first Earth Days. I was a member of the youth advisory committee for the mayor of my hometown and used to help organize. I was playing music and in bands. I played the drums and so I was, and of course music still is and was so much of the influence of that time, the values, the words, the messages that were being given, and I was helping organize concerts and venues for young people to gather and listen to music and bands and things. So I was always involved in some type of social good, and I was a hopeless idealist and absolutely wanted to change the world, and yes, I still do now.
Do you still consider yourself an idealist?
Very much so, or maybe optimist is a better word. At the same time, we need to be realists, you know.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
yes, but I think optimism and idealism, having, in the pure sense of the word, having ideals, having noble ideals and virtues and values of life that guide our heart and guide our mind and guide our actions into the world.
You are not only a senior monk, but also a senior activist. So you have a vast experience in activism, as you said, protests, organizing concerts, and so on. What's your best memory of an action where you participated as an activist?
There are many, but I remember when you because you forwarded questions to me ahead of the actual interview, and the first thing that came to my mind was because it was one of the largest collective actions I participated in, and because of the particular reception by the other people participating there. It was a very, very, very large animal rights protest in the streets of London, somewhere in the mid 80s. I don't remember exactly, but it would have been about 84, 85, 86. And three of us, I was already a sannyasi. Sannyasi is the Sanskrit word that people would say monk. It means literally a renunciant. But at that time, and there were three of us there together, and it was amazing. There were tens of thousands of people marching together, and also the reception, like I say, because people kept. It wasn't so. It's more common perhaps today to see spiritual representatives involved in social movements, but in those days it wasn't very common, and people just kept coming up to us and thanking for us to be there, for being there. So of course that was very rewarding, but just the power of the unity of so many people, expressing their compassion for all beings and their righteous anger at the injustice being done.
That really sounds amazing. I know that besides the protests that you have organized and your teaching of meditation, you are also an advocate for Prout, which is an alternative to capitalism. Can you briefly explain what it is about?
The meditation, or about Prout, or both?
Well, we can, yeah, I know that meditation is also a hot topic. So, first, let's start with the meditation and then we go into Prout.
Maybe first start with the connectivity between the two.
Yeah, that makes more sense. Yeah.
Okay, because yes, again, it's not very common that very spiritually involved people. Well, excuse me. Again, it is more common these days that spiritually oriented people or people deeply into spiritual practice are involved in social movements or in social justice struggles or radical social change, revolutionary change. There have always been, and in fact, one way of looking at the history of some of the great known spiritual or religious figures is that they themselves were revolutionaries. And Buddha himself, what he created was a revolt or a questioning of, and essentially you can say a revolt against what he considered the dogmas of the prevalent religious teachings in India at that time. Many people, of course, considered Jesus himself to be a very revolutionary character, and probably the best known story about that is him going in the temples and throwing away the tables of the money lenders, etc. And there's the tradition of liberation theology from South America, perhaps Brazil, if I remember correctly, itself, and that was started by Jesuit priests, and probably many people in Portugal are more familiar with that. Leonardo Boff being one of the main voices of that in the world today. So, a deep, or what I consider an authentic spirituality, embraces everything, and that means also society, not negating or neglecting society and therefore social conditions and therefore the socioeconomic, cultural reality that we all live in. So to me, it's perfectly natural and logical that an authentic spirituality and spiritual practice relates to society, and should, as it's meant to transform people, it should also transform society. As it's meant to liberate people's minds and hearts, it should also liberate society from injustice and oppression and antiquated social institutions, and particularly, as we see in the world today, the socioeconomic paradigm. So just mentioning that as a bridge into explaining about Prout. Prout is an acronym for the Progressive Utilization Theory. That's a bit of a mouthful. And it needs
Progressive Utilization Theory, yeah.
Yes, okay. So, and simply speaking, it's a socioeconomic theory. Which is based on universal human values, which is based on a spiritual outlook and spiritual understanding of life and reality. And before I go into more detail, let me just give a perfect example of that. One of them that I think is the most clear, simple examples. We have a philosophical concept in Ananda Marga, and therefore in Prout. So the founder, the spiritual founder and guide of Ananda Marga, the guru, was named Sri Sri Anandamurti. And his given legal name was Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar, Sri Prabhat Ranjan Sarkar. And he was also the founder of Prout. So it stems from a spiritual base, a spiritual philosophy, but it stands on its own in the same. And one of the concepts, one of the philosophical concepts, both in Ananda Marga's teachings and therefore in Prout, is something we call cosmic inheritance. And this is very similar to, basically the same as what many indigenous cultures embrace and express. That we are not the creators of any of this life around us or the universe that we live in, but we have inherited it. And we have inherited it collectively. No individual has the right to it than any other. And if we take that to heart and distill that very lofty ideal and concept into a pragmatic way, well, in Prout, there's a principle. There are 5 fundamental principles in Prout, and the first of them says that no individual should be allowed to accumulate any physical or material wealth without the language is without the approval or permission of the society or the collective body. Material, it emphasizes physical or material wealth. There are all sorts of wealth in this world. We have emotional wealth, we have our intelligence, we have creative wealth, there is intellectual wealth, there is spiritual wealth. And those are limitless. If anyone gets more of that, it creates no harm or impediment to any other individual member of society. But regarding material or physical wealth, and this would include financial, land, property, etc. Regarding physical wealth, if someone has too much, someone else doesn't have enough. So, whether it is an individual, a family, a company, an organization of any sort, there has to be socially defined limits on how much one entity, one individual or one entity can accumulate, can own. Because without that, and as we see very much in the world today with growing inequality, and it's been a similar pattern throughout history, then others won't have enough. So I like to use this as a perfect example of how you can take a very, again, I've said, a lofty philosophical concept, an ideal, but distill it down to a practicality. So there's a principle, and on the basis of that principle, then policies can be developed. How do we do that? How do we enact that principle in the hard soil of the earth and in the challenging reality of practical social life? And there are examples of curbing accumulation of wealth, or at least financial wealth, though they're not so well known in history.
So that's the first principle, right? They are 5 in total.
Yes, but I think, let me just, without going into those, because it in itself is a long subject, but let me say there are concepts there, again, of recognizing in the other principles, and without going into them in detail, they embrace concepts of recognizing these different types of resources or different types of wealth on all levels of being. So it's not only physical and material, but also, as I mentioned before, there's physical, there's metaphysical, there's physical, mental, and spiritual. Just recognizing that all those various types of resources do exist, and then the principles speak about then how they should be utilized properly. The term is maximum utilization and rational distribution. So, and the last principle, and so again, without going into the detail, but then the last principle just says how there needs to be continuous adjustments always made according to time, place, and person.
Interesting. So I know that you will provide me with some resources so I can add to at the bottom of the video on YouTube, then people can learn more about Prout. Now I wanted to go to the practical side. I know that you've done some work in Covilhã in the north of Portugal, central north of Portugal. Can you go into it? What has been happening over there related to Prout?
It's central Portugal, more than
Central
north.
Portugal. Yeah, central Portugal.
Hey, Cova da Beira, or
Yes.
Beira and interior, yeah, between. But let me also frame that just a bit with a bit more about Prout, because I said very little, and it relates to some of the very good work that's going on in this region of the country. There are various aspects of Prout. It has a theory of history, of historical change, of cycles, of class, and of leadership. It has concepts of and recommendations for governance and government, for political concepts, how to improve upon the current democratic system. And some of those, for example, are having qualifications to be able to vote, not just age. And also, ideally, and we'll see when that can come about in the future, but having a democracy that's based on without political parties, but that individuals stand on their own merit. And it has social concepts, and then also very much economic concepts and a very detailed economic system. And just to highlight, so the grand, you can say, picture of what it paints is a very decentralized economy, that there should be self-reliant, autonomous, self-sufficient, self-reliant regional zones throughout the world, throughout each country and throughout the world, that are very much based on a high level of participation by the people who live in that area. And this is speaking to areas that are, for example, down to populations of about in rural areas, and potentially even within urban areas, but on a different basis of divisions. But as far as rural areas go, because they have a capacity for more self-reliance with, of course, food productivity and other things, to levels of populations of about 100,000 people. So the macroeconomic structure is, we call it three-tiered economy, and that the vast majority of economic activity, whether industrial or agricultural, and all the processing of agricultural for making things that are needed in order to do agriculture, as well as processing of products from the harvesting of the agriculture, that as far as practicable, the majority of activity should be done through democratically managed, worker-owned and managed cooperatives. That's the bulk of the economy in the Prout vision. There is also the private sector. There can also be private ownership of commercial and trade and etc. But there should be limitations on that. They should be things that are not involved in producing the basic necessities of life, and they should be relatively a small number of people involved in those. So when I say not producing the basic necessities of life, for example, farming should be done by a cooperative. But when people want to do something processing the results of farming, for example, running a cafe or a restaurant, or maybe a very specialized bakery, or developing a particular food product, and again, if it's something very small, with a small number of employees, that can be a private enterprise. And then there's also very large, complex things can possibly be owned by the state, but even preferably by local government rather than national government, regional or local governments, or by some type of autonomous public entities. For example, in the United States, at least previously, and I think, yes, some still do exist, utility companies, for example, electricity suppliers, they were called public utilities, and they were semi-autonomous. They were not owned by the government, and they were controlled by a board of public appointees and like this. So that the bulk of the economy, the main part of the economy, is run by cooperatives, small private sector with limitations as to what they can do and how many people should be working in any one of those businesses. And then also the key, what we call key industries, the large scope of the large and complex things. It could be, for example, generating power, or perhaps large mining operations, things like this, that would be owned by government or by autonomous bodies, and preferably regional or local government rather than national government. So just a few key aspects. These are just some of the fundamentals of the Proutist economy. And there's a lot more detail, very, very many policies and a great depth and breadth of it. So, with that as do you want to go ahead and ask something or?
Yes. Now I would like you to explain us a bit what's happening in Cova da Beira in central Portugal.
Okay, well, that's why I wanted to mention that first. So one of the things that Proutists, so with the people who have accepted Prout and work for its partial implementation. Let me say as a disclaimer also that there's nowhere in the world right now where Prout is actively being implemented. There are many good people in doing many good things on this planet who've never heard of Prout, but are doing things that Prout advocates. For example, everyone involved in the cooperative movement. Let me just add, so some people may say, oh, that has aspects of both capitalism and socialism or communism in it. And yes, that's true. But also, even today with the concept of mixed economy, and even though those countries consider themselves or are labeled as capitalist, some very good examples or practical examples of this kind of arrangement exist, for example, in Singapore and in Norway, where the state, and of course relatively small countries, either small by population or small by size, but where the government owns major industries and runs them very efficiently. The oil industry in Norway, the airlines in Singapore, many things. And so just it's not something totally unknown in the world. But because of the concept of limitations on wealth, fundamentally different than what's happening in either of those countries also.
Or also because it has the spiritual side involved, which is not common in those mixed economies.
Very much so. Mm-hmm. In fact, when the founder of Prout visited Europe in 1979, he made a comment at one point that was something like, the Scandinavian, Northern European, and I think maybe particularly the Nordic societies are perhaps the closest resemblance in the world today, or at that time, and also today, of what Prout aspires to be, but they were spiritually bankrupt. So in this part of Portugal, so I am located in a village, or actually between two villages. I'm working at a project here called Ananda Kalyani. We'll put all the links afterwards in the notes of the podcast, which is a project of Ananda Marga. And so we are a rural project, a community, something that's a hybrid. We call it a master unit. It's a bit of a hybrid between a community, an eco-village, and an ashram. And there are many diverse activities going on considering the number of people involved and the small place that we're living in. So those of us who are on the land, the land is in between the villages of Paul and Arundo. Both of these are in, excuse my pronunciation, but Covia area. We're about halfway between Covia and Fundal, and we have a lot of contact with both Câmara Municipais and Universidade de Beira Interior, and most of the social agencies and what we could call the activist community in this part of the country. And part of what's going on is what the Proutists, and so people who have embraced Prout and are inspired by it and are working to try to implement it in different ways, call themselves Proutists, and I think I was mentioning before that unfortunately in the world today there's no one place where there's an example of Prout being implemented, at least in any elaborate way. But there are many good people throughout the world doing many good things who have never even heard of Prout, that what they are doing is very much an expression of what Prout advocates. For example, the cooperative movement, and cooperatives that are indeed running in an ideal way, truly in a democratic way, and are successful in what they're doing, meaning they're actually solvent, and as an entity, as a company, or as a financial or economic endeavor, and more satisfying and productive to the people who work there. So, and this is something many people don't realize and don't know, and there's research, well documented research about this, that the most successful cooperatives are more efficient, more productive, and more profitable in terms of the degree of their endeavor compared to many corporations. And certainly the levels of worker satisfaction and the quality of life is a high indicator amongst the people who work in them. So, and that's just one example of aspects of Prout that are being successfully implemented in different parts of the world. And one of those, in fact, probably the best example and the most successful example of modern industrialized cooperatives is very close to here, because it's in the Basque region of Spain, the Mondragon cooperative complex. A very exemplary and inspiring story. And that was also started by a Jesuit priest, by the way. So back to what we're doing here locally, one of the template methodologies that Prout advocates, and it's not very clearly defined, but the basis of it and the concept of it is explained, is called block level planning. And again, Prout was originated in India. And a block in India is a particular geographical jurisdiction. It's a political division used there. And so like we have, what do you have here? Conselho, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Conselho, yes, you are.
Okay, you have regions and districts and conselhos and, etc. So in India, one of the jurisdictions of the social setup and political setup there is called a block. And as I mentioned earlier, a block in a rural area is an area of approximately 100,000 people that has a capacity for self-reliance. And in an urban center, there are different ways of delineating it. And so the basis, one way of simply describing block level planning is a participatory regional development methodology that is done by the people who live in that area, not by bureaucrats or professionals in the capital city or wherever it may be somewhere else. The key aspect of it is it's done by the local people who live in that area, who know their needs, who know their aspirations, and it's highly participatory. So the Proutists in this area and were inspired and engaged in an effort to try to apply this in practical terms here in this area. So Cova da Beira Converge, Cova da Beira is a known, it's a region in Portugal that has a history, that has some identity, and more or less it's defined by the boundaries of three neighboring municipalities. So this is Fundão, Ecovia e Belmont. And the exact boundaries of Cova da Beira maybe are slightly different, but basically these three municipalities define it. So this effort started first with statistical research. And for this, there was also guidance from and reliance on, of course, some experts from outside the area and some agencies that have the information, etc. But there was a time taken to do a deep analysis of the resources, the potentialities, the needs, the carrying capacity in all different types of parameters, with the soil and agriculture, with the weather patterns, with water availability, with demographic information, etc. There was an extensive, it went on for quite, I don't remember exactly, perhaps 6 months, where there was a gathering of statistical data and then analysis of it. That was followed by identification of key stakeholders in the area. And then there were, if I remember correctly, 16 that were identified, including Câmara Municipais and the university, and then different key social agencies or NGOs that have been involved in regional development in different ways over the years. And there were extensive interviews done with these different 16 stakeholders. And then all of that information, as far as similar things, what are their needs? What is their vision for the future? Where do they see, kind of like a SWOT type or SWOC type analysis, where do they see, et cetera, strengths and needs and et cetera. And all of that information then was compiled. There was then a presentation. This was done at Universidade de Beira Interior, at UBI, some years back. And from that, and there were, if I remember correctly, about 90 participants in that conference. And then it was open to the general public. And then from that conference, working groups were developed with focus groups. So one in agriculture, one in commerce and trade, one in education, one in cultural life, one for social welfare, in different, I don't remember, maybe a dozen different focus and working groups. And since that time, they've been meeting monthly and developing plans and proposals for, defining priorities and developing alternative proposals, etc. And that process has been going. So the entire process has been going on now, if I remember correctly, about 2.5 years, and it continues until now. And the number of people involved every month at those meetings, it varies from anything from maybe 30 to 60 people who show up. And each month is a particular theme for like a panel or a roundtable or a fishbowl discussion, etc. And then also the different working groups meet amongst themselves and further develop their plans and proposals. So it's been a lengthy process, and everyone who's involved, and this is the general public. There's just a handful of people from the Prout movement who have been facilitating the whole thing, but everybody knows, because everybody knows that it's those few people who ignited this whole process. So they have requested a presentation about Prout itself. So that's just one of the many activities that we are doing in this part of the country. And that whole effort is really, there's 4 or 5 people who have been from the Prout local Prout organization. The local organization is called the Prout Research Institute, Prout Research Institute of Portugal, so PRIP, PRIP.pt. And COVID and the movement, the effort for the block level planning is called Cova da Beira Converge. See, and they also have their own website. So that's what's happening there. And then there's study circles and public presentations and various activities that the Proutists do throughout Portugal. In addition to that, and I also give presentations on Prout to different audiences. I've spoken at the, if I remember correctly, it's the Universidade de Minas in Braga, if I remember correctly, in the north of Portugal. The professors were more interested than the students. That was interesting for me. So, and many Prout activists gathered in Lisbon, in Lisboa. It was very interesting because it was in February 2020, and it was the last live person-to-person gathering in Lisbon before everything closed down because of COVID. Literally, I think we were the last. There were things scheduled for the next weekend, and then they never happened. And it came under the banner of, it was called Future Europe or Future Planet. I don't remember now. And there was a wonderful conference that we organized together with local organizations at the Nova Universidade.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it was really really very, very well received. There were about 250 people. There was Eckhard Reinhardt, if I remember his name correctly. He's a very progressive economist from Norway. James Killigan, who's a political economist from the U.S., and many local speakers from Equalize and other progressive Portuguese movements were there. And Helena Nordberg Hodge, who's known for her movement called Local Futures, very much into localizing the economy and regenerative culture, came online. She spoke to the conference online from Australia, I think it was. So yeah, it was a wonderful event. So various programs have been done over the years here in Portugal, actually. A small group of people that have kept the Prout movement vibrant in Portugal. And again, they function closely associated with, but independently also from the Ananda Marga movement. So again, the Prout teachings, the Prout philosophy and theory came from the founder of Ananda Marga, and so there's always that connection. But one does not need to be a meditator or a follower of Ananda Marga to be involved with Prout and its activities.
So basically, anyone can join Prout initiatives, regardless of their spiritual path or religion or their beliefs.
Yes, and that's also the same for Ananda Marga. We have our own practice, and we love to teach people our own practice. But there are people, for example, at our project here, Ananda Kalyani. We have volunteers and friends they may do another form of meditation or another form of yoga, or they don't do those things at all, but they just like being here with us or our lifestyle in general, being here in the countryside. So at Ananda Kalyani, so I like to say it's a spiritually based, service-oriented, mission-driven hub for social, for personal, for ecological, economic, and cultural resilience and regenerative development. The aspiration, again, is to become a model of regenerative and sustainable development and lifestyle. Of course, we have organic farming. We're doing agroforestry as well as syntropic agriculture. We host many different events, retreats, and programs, Erasmus programs, youth exchanges, and different types of training courses. Only a few people live actually here on the land, and Many live in the villages. We have Paul and Arundo are 5 minutes in either direction from our land. So there are people living there also in some houses we rent in their own apartments. And we are not there yet. It's embryonic in our development, but we aspire to also become more of a model of self-reliance and regenerative practice. We have people working with children's education, with the arts and culture, with it very much environmental and ecological work. And there's different associations that have been registered and are working with and associated with us. Ecoactivo is the ecological environmental part. They do a lot about reforestation, fire prevention, water regeneration, agroforestry, and environmental education. Also using technology, the applying of technology to intervene and prevent and foster a more regenerative development and protection of nature. Artivos is the arts and culture way. Education entity is called Pequeno Verde, Tiny Green Island. And there's a MERT. A MERT is a social welfare and relief and development agency. We're feeding needy people. There's Cozina Solidaria in the Lisboa area and also in this area. We're, since the time of COVID and continuing since then, providing meals, vegetarian, healthy meals to people that are struggling for their basic needs. We are hosting and helping integrate refugee families into Portugal. And there's also sponsorship programs for children in developing countries in India and Africa. A variety of activities like this. So it's a nice mix of a different types of social development, community development, and social transformation activities, with the basis of doing our meditation, our yogic practices. We offer, of course, instruction in classes and retreats in the spiritual practices as well, and regularly in this area and also in Lisboa. We have a small center, Ananda Marga, in Olaias. We participate in many public programs like Feira Alternative every year, etc.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of things going on. I will share the links so people can know more about each one of the initiatives. Now to end this episode, I like to ask to every guest I have, if you had to give one tip to our listeners or our viewers, how do you think that one can become more active, a more active citizen in society?
Simple. Get up and do. There are so many valuable ways that anyone and everyone can contribute to making a better world, and each of us has our own talents and our own passions and our own loves of what we can and will do for others. And let me comment on that last few words, for others. I think the best activism is done in the spirit of service. The motto of Ananda Marga is for the liberation of self and for the welfare of the universe, or for the welfare of all. This is often simplified into self-realization and service to all, service to humanity or service to everything and everyone. So I think, I did a program recently. In fact, that's where we met each other, Mariana, isn't it? So there was a workshop, and the advertising of the workshop shared a quote from Che Guevara. And to simplify it, he says, "Let me say, at the risk of seeming ridiculous, that the true revolutionary is guided by the deepest feelings of love." So we need a revolution of love. We need a revolution based in loving everyone, not hating, and therefore caring for, doing for others. So I think the best form of activism is done as a service, in the spirit of service, in the loving support of and help to others and everyone to make this world better for everyone. And that means also sometimes doing really strong and powerful and revolutionary things, because that's the situation we're always in. To get real liberation, we have to fight the negative tendencies inside ourselves, in our minds, in our hearts. And to liberate society, we have to fight and struggle. But to do that imbued with a love and mind full of love, so we don't lose the plot, as we say in English, so we keep it clear what we're doing. And having said that, then what should one do? There are limitless things to do. There's people who contribute through their artistic and creative talent. There are people who are going to educate others, whether it's online, like what you're doing, or in a classroom, or sitting under a tree somewhere with a group of others doing workshops or classroom, as in Africa, many are under trees, still in the villages. Whether it's doing advocacy work and lobbying, or developing policy, better policies based on proper values of life. Whether it's getting out and marching in the street and raising your fist, they're all valuable forms of activism, and each of us has to find our niche and what we can do, what the fire burning inside of us leads us to do, and what we can do in the best of our abilities to bring about changes. And it's the combination of all of those efforts that will build a critical mass. So like I said in the beginning, get up and do. Reflect.
Thank you so much. So guys, get up and do, take action according to your skills, and always with love. I think that sums up what you said, but you said much more beautiful than I'm saying. So Dada MP, thank you so much for your time and for sharing these things about meditation and Prout. For our listeners, thank you for listening, for watching this episode, and see you next time.
Muito obrigado pela oportunidade.
Obrigada.